and welcome. My name is Bren Carlo and I am the Public Affairs Director of the Zionist Federation of Australia. Welcome to tonight's Lockdown Learning. We are in for a treat tonight. Gil Hovav will barely need introducing for many of you. He is an Israeli TV personality and author of several books, which I might add have been translated into English. That Gil is Israel's most famous foodie would be reason enough to have him as our guest tonight, but Gil brings such a zest for life into all of his conversations that it makes all events with him special. I might add that since the lockdown learning began, I've been baking bread a lot. Now that it finally feels that we are at the beginning of the end of our lockdown period, I have a feeling we should have had Gil join us weeks ago to inspire all of us to be much more creative and joyous in our kitchens than perhaps we have been. Now tonight, Gil will be talking to Adele Stowe-Lindner. Adele studied Jewish Studies and History at Melbourne University before moving to London and completing a Master's in Community Work. She worked in the Jewish community in London with youth and in the homeless sector in both Australia and London, always with a community focus. She returned to Melbourne with her husband and children in 2012. Now, before I turn you over to Gil and Adele, just a quick reminder that this time next week, we will be talking to Yossi Klein Halevi. I will send out emails about Yossi tomorrow. If you're not on our email list, tell us in the comments and I'll get in touch. I encourage you to write any questions you have this evening in the comments section, and please feel free to share this conversation on your own feed. So now, without further ado, Adele.
Thanks, Bren, and Gil, welcome, a pleasure. Gil, and your gin and tonic, I believe you might have next to you.
Martini, if you don't mind.
Martini, sorry, I'm uncultured. So we were just chatting before it started about lockdown experiences and the changes. And I wondered whether you can share with us, we both kind of commiserated with each other that maybe lockdown is coming to an end and the wild life will begin again. So it sounds as if you've really enjoyed the lockdown.
I loved it. You know, when it all started, I just came back to Israel from a conference in Austria. I was lecturing there. And then word got out that whoever came back from several countries must be in isolation, not only in quarantine, but totally in isolation, in his own room, not eat with anyone, not wash his clothes with anyone's clothes, etc., etc. And that was me. So that was 10 days. And then the day I went out, and thankfully I'm healthy, and then the day I went out, quarantine began for 40 days. So up until yesterday, for 50 days, I haven't stepped out of home. And it was so good. I loved it. I loved every single second of it. I was with the people that I like most, my partner and our daughter. I was cooking all day long. I was writing books. I wrote two books in 50 days. Who would believe? I read about 20 books. I slept, you know, like a little goat. It was heaven. And yesterday we went out for the first time. Now it's sort of semi-legal to go out. And I was sorry. I felt that this very special time is gone. Now, of course, it came with a lot of bad news, of course, but family-wise, from my point of view, it was a blessing.
I read your book and I got the feeling from your book that a lot in your family, many people in your family are not such introverts, and they seemed, the picture you painted in the book was that they were kind of gregarious and loud and outgoing, maybe in people's face. So I'm wondering whether, are you the black sheep in the family, that you loved the 50 days isolation, or did your whole extended family enjoy it too?
It was very surprising, because when I told my friends kept calling me, and family kept calling me and saying, oh, well, 50 days at home, aren't you bored? Aren't you? And I said, I'm elated. I'm thrilled. It's so good. And they said, we're not surprised. We're not surprised. And I said, what do you mean you're not surprised? Am I not friendly? Usually I'm very outgoing, but this was, you know, I'm really considering joining a convent now. I want to become a nun. I see the charm of it, but we're Jewish. What can we do?
Yes, it's true. It's true. On the topic of your family, the other thing that really interested me in the book was the really strong Yemenite flavor, in sometimes in the food, but also I felt like I got to know a different side of Jerusalem, actually. And we'll talk more about Jerusalem, but when I commented to a Yemenite friend of mine in Israel, he was laughing and said, "Oh, Gil Hovav, he's an idol because he still uses the Yemenite accent."
Pronunciation.
Yes,
Yes,
and he said, right, and he said, I got rid of my accent when as a teenager because I wanted to get the Ashkenazi girls, but he has kept his accent, and it seems to me maybe you also got an Ashkenazi, even with your accent.
So my ancestry is very, very, very mixed. I'm a canine dog, I have everything in me. I'm a bit of a Yeke, a bit of a German Jew, a bit of a Russian Jew, a bit of a Lithuanian Jew, Moroccan Jew, Yemenite Jew. But whenever you ask a person who has one drop of Yemenite blood or one Yemenite gene in him or in her, what are you? They say Yemenite. And, my great-grandfather from the Ashkenazi side was Eliezer ben Yehuda, the reviver of Hebrew. It's a great honor, but I'm so proud of my Yemenite grandmother, especially whom I knew, and grandfather whom I didn't know, but still that I look up to them. And we never felt deprived. Yemenites are usually very, 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 very poor, always poor. And my Yemenite side of the family was poor in the old days. But they never felt deprived. They never felt that Israel wasn't theirs. They never felt discriminated against or whatever. They felt that they were the pioneers, and they were. So yes, I heard the Yemenite pronunciation, which is the Sephardi pronunciation at home, and I sort of kept it. My pronunciation is mixed, but I love it. When I speak like this, for instance, I'll just say a few sentences in Hebrew so you can hear the right pronunciation, the majestic pronunciation. So, for instance, if we take, let's say, a poem by our national poet, Chaim Nachman Bialik, who was an Ashkenazi, of course. So if you say it in Hebrew, if you recite it in Hebrew, in the Ashkenazi pronunciation, it would be Shalom Rav Shuvech Sipora Nechmedes. It's very nice and it's very round and it's very Central European. But if you recite it in the Yemenite pronunciation, it's Shalom Rav Shuvech Tzipora Nechmada. This is the sound of God. This is how God speaks. I'm sure she speaks like this. So I'm trying to keep this in my Hebrew. In my English, you can't hear it, but in my Hebrew, I'm trying to keep it, yes.
I think it might be the sound of God and also the sound of a Hebrew teacher in the diaspora. Because when you talk like that, it makes me feel, and probably many people my age, feel very nostalgic for their Hebrew teacher in grade school in the diaspora.
Yes, and the sound of my father, of course, who was the news announcer of Israel. He announced that Jerusalem was freed in the 6-day war, and he announced this and he announced that. And this was his voice. He still reads from heaven, but every day at 6 o'clock at the opening of the transmission of the Israeli radio, there is the Shema Israel in his voice. And this is his pronunciation, and I try to keep up with it because it's, he had a much, 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 much greater voice than mine, but still, it's good to remember.
On the topic of your book and the Yemenite, that the other thing that was really interesting to me is that Jerusalem, for those people who've read Amos Oz's book, A Tale of Love and Darkness, it's a really interesting, your book is such an interesting read because when you read them next to each other, you really, really feel that you're getting a completely different experience and insight into Jerusalem. And he's got, that academic, very Ashkenazi, but essentially, the authors and when I was reading your book, I felt like I was walking down the streets of a completely different Jerusalem, and I was popping my head into someone's family, like intimate family, and it was so densely Jerusalem, so rich. So I wondered if you've read his book, or if you felt that you were,
his book.
yeah, if you're giving, but this is such an important and a different side. It filled out the city and made it kind of a real place. Jerusalem became a real place.
So A Tale of Love and Darkness is about Jerusalem of the 40s and maybe 50s. That's before my time. I was born in 1962. Still, when I was born, Jerusalem was the center of Israel. No longer true, of course. The center of Israel is Tel Aviv. But when I was growing up in Jerusalem, Jerusalem was the city of the educated. Jerusalem was the city of the government. Jerusalem was the city of all the establishments. My parents were both very high up in the IBA, in the Israeli Broadcast Authority, and it was in Jerusalem, and they were huge celebrities, of course. And so everything happened in Jerusalem, although Jerusalem was tiny and split, just like East and West Berlin, you know, it was at the edge of the country, and but all the intelligentsia were in Jerusalem. Nowadays, things are totally different. You know, Jerusalem is a Haredi city. Jerusalem is very big, very poor, and very different. You know that talking about quarantine, the only places that were put under total lockdown were a few neighborhoods in Jerusalem and a few neighborhoods in Bnei Brak, in the Haredi cities of Israel. So Jerusalem really changed. This is one of the reasons that I have left Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. But when I was growing up in Jerusalem of the 60s and 70s, it was the center of the world. Everybody was in Jerusalem. Everybody was looking up to Jerusalem. We felt really special. We were, in a certain stupid Israeli way, we were snobs. We were sure that it's all about us. And I always say that the trilogy that I've written, and one of the books was translated into English, Candies from Heaven, these are stories about a family that thinks that it's Mayflower nobility, but it's ridiculous. I mean, in Israel, there is no nobility. There is no nobility in the world, of course, but in Israel, you know, what were we dreaming of in the 60s? We really wanted cupboards from Formica. We said, one day we'll get it. And these were our dreams. So this is what I wrote about, because the tension between the people who revived Hebrew and the pioneers who established Israel, etc., and these were all the people who raised me up. They were all dreaming about chocolate cake or about, you know, kasha or about this or about that. So this is why I thought that they deserve a book and later on a trilogy.
I'm wondering whether, because you pointed out that you grew up in the 60s, and again, my son just interviewed his grandfather, which is my father-in-law, you know, for a Roots project, the bar mitzvah experience. Yes. And my father-in-law commented to him last week that he had gone to Israel 2 days after the Six-Day War to volunteer as a, you know, to pick fruit and on the kibbutz, you know, with lots of other British Jews. And he said, you know, they took us to the Kotel and it was so special. And he said, but I swear, he said, look, I might be imagining this, Yona, to my son. But when I went there just after the Six-Day War, he said, I swear it didn't feel as tall as it feels now. And we thought about it, and he said, I think, is it possible? I think maybe they've made the ground below go, you know, slope down to make the icon go up. It's a terrible thing to say, but I think it's true.
And I can even give you the details, because one of the books, I told you I wrote 2 books during quarantine. One of the books was about my travels around the world, and in one of the chapters I write about the gate of Ishtar, That's the 8th gate of Babylon, and it's in Germany right now. They dug it up in Iraq, and they shipped it to Germany, and it stands there in a museum, and it's the most amazing structure, you know, beautiful and blue and gold and tiles and this and that. And it's smaller than the Wailing Wall. So I went to check the size of the Wailing Wall, and it turns out that the Wailing Wall is much higher today than it was in the days of the temple. It had additions in 3 different eras. The last time they added stones to the Wailing Wall was hundreds of years ago, but still, when, I don't know, King Solomon was looking at it, it was different. And when East Jerusalem was freed in June 1967, the Mughrabi neighborhood, the North Africa neighborhood of the old city of Jerusalem, was just at the wall. They built, the buildings were touching the wall. There was a very, very, very narrow alley between the buildings and the wall. So I would assume that your father saw the wall from this angle. Then a few months later, they destructed this neighborhood, this makeshift neighborhood, and they built this wide piazza in front of the wall, and they lowered it too. So this is why it looks higher. But also, if you go down the excavations of the wall, and you can reach to really ground zero, to the first layer of stones, it's 9 meters below ground. So it's actually, the wall is even much higher. So yes, he was right. It wasn't dreaming.
Do you remember Jerusalem in those times, just before? I know you were very little if you were born in 1962.
Yes, you know, these were traumatic times. I grew up in a city that was split. There was a wall in the middle of the city. When the 6-Day War occurred, I was 5 years old. So I was a very young kid, but I remember the fear. I remember going with my mom to work. My mom worked at the radio, and the radio was near the border. So you had to jump from building to building to avoid snipers. And
Wow.
One day she was hit, and she was wounded, not severely wounded, but I remember my mother bleeding from a gunshot. This is, for a kid, it's a trauma. And since the war happened, with the voices of my father and his sister, who were both the major news announcers of the radio with their Yemenite voices, so I heard all the war in the shelter from the radio with their voices. And I remember my father announcing, we still have the recording, of course, that Eastern Jerusalem was freed, was conquered. And this was on the 4th day of the 6-Day War. So for Jerusalem, the 6-Day War lasted for 4 days. But these were 4 days of bombardment and fire and difficulty, of course. And then he came home. And after he read the news, he came home, and we all went to celebrate. Nothing was open, of course. Jerusalem was a battlefield. Just we stepped out of the shelter and went to one of the houses, and we sat there at the kitchen and ate, you know, I don't know, candy and chocolate or whatever. And then a bombardment started again, because the Jordanian army was still bombarding Jerusalem. And each mom grabbed a kid, not necessarily her own child. I always remember this in an Australian way, because I know that kangaroos, when they attack, each kangaroo, a female, takes a cub and puts it in its pocket and flees. And later on, they do the bringing home thing. So each mom grabbed the kid, and they all rushed to the shelter. And my father grabbed my hand, straightened his tie. He was always with a tie and the suit, and started walking slowly to the shelter, and bombs were falling, and buildings were on fire, and there was smoke, and the scent of gunpowder in the air, and and I was, pulling him and saying, "Dad, let's go to the shelter." And he went slowly and slowly, and he said, "Gilly, they would not make us run." This was the lesson that I learned from my father. Never, ever would they let us run. Okay.
What other, it sounds like if I name key events in Israeli history, now I'm very intrigued what other news he's announced?
Everything. People used to say when Moshe Hovav, that was his name, when Moshe Hovav tells the news, there's a war going on. So it was the unification of Jerusalem. It was the whole of the 6-day war. It was the death of Ben Gurion. It was many, 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 many news bulletins during the Yom Kippur War. People thought that this was the voice of God. People really thought that he was authority. And it's strange because he was such a sweet, kind person, but he had that voice that was his trap. Everybody thought that he is, no, he was, let me show you a picture of his because he was really good looking. Let's see here. This is my father. And I'll just show you a picture of my mom because I'm sitting at my desk and all the pictures of the family are always watching me when I write. So this is my mom, who was a movie star. She was so beautiful. One day I was walking the street in Tel Aviv, and this elderly lady stops me. This is my mother again. I'll show you the picture here. Look at her. It's just, Greta Garbo. I was walking the street in Tel Aviv, and this elderly lady stops me, and she says, "You are the son of Drora ben Avi." That's what the name of my mom. And I say, "Yes." And she looks at me with great disappointment, like, where did it all go? And she said, "Do you know how beautiful she was?" And I said, "Yes, it's my mom, I know." "No, you don't know." I said, No, you tell me. She says, "Listen, I was a raving beauty. But when I would walk to high school with your mom, people would look at her and fall off balconies, one after the other, all the way to high school. She was really amazing." But coming back to my father, so he was, a hunk, great sense of humor, an amazing voice, loved by many women and loved many women, as did my mother, who loved many men. So he was a living person. He wasn't this idol that people think that Moshe Hovav was. And this was another reason for writing my books, to show them as real people, to show them as the funny people who brought me up, because I feel really lucky to have been raised by these crazy, crazy, nuts family. It was fun. It was good.
I wanted to talk a bit about your family because, again, it's for anyone who's learned Hebrew in the diaspora, and Hebrew is so much it's part of Israeli identity. It's your key to, in the diaspora, to Jewish identity, I think, and that's part of, the Zionist Federation, the ZFA, and these kind of organisations all around the world. Part of it is engaging people in Hebrew language. So your relation to Eliezer ben Yehuda is very cool. But when you spoke in Australia, you were at pains to really explain he wasn't an easygoing character. And I think anyone who kind of, the fable, the story that he only refused to speak only Hebrew to his, to his child, and how difficult that might have been, really made me wonder whether you think that you can be a revolutionary like that and also be nice, or do you think his character, we should thank his character, I guess, for the fact that we can all communicate now?
I think, first of all, I admire Eliezer Ben Yehuda, whom, of course, I didn't know. He died in 1922. This is when my mom was born. So it's 40 years before I was born. I never knew him. He was a prophet. I think we owe him the state of Israel because it wouldn't have been established without Hebrew, and it's all because of him. He paid heavily for his prophecy, for his quest. 6 of his children died, his first wife died, he was persecuted. And he wasn't a nice guy. He wasn't a kind person. He was very honest, he was very brave, he was very intelligent. I'm not sure he is the guy that you want as a friend. But I can definitely say that all his children, some of whom I knew, I didn't know my grandfather, who was his eldest son, but I knew some of his children, admired him and always talked about him as, a back father, because he was always standing with his back to the room, working on the big dictionary, and they were not allowed to speak to him. If they wanted to have a conversation with their father, they had to hand in a written request to their mom, and then maybe a week later, they would get a 20-minute interview with their father. This is how sacred he was in the family, because they all knew that he was doing something holy, and this was reviving Hebrew. And I think that revolutionaries are like this. I mean, I'm sure that many people who really have made a great change in the world, what have I done? I wrote a few books, I cook, I do television. Okay, that's nice. No, he made history. So when you're that big, you have to be difficult. Otherwise, you're crushed.
What do you think he would think about the way we use Hebrew today? Do you think
He would love it.
He would love
it.
He
would love it. Hebrew today is very, I wouldn't even say dirty. I would say Hebrew is filthy. Hebrew is infested with English words, with tech words, with Arab words, with Russian words, with Ethiopian words, with Yiddish words, with everything. And this is what he wanted. He wanted Hebrew to be alive. A language is a living creature. If it's holy, if it's sacred, if it's pure, it's dead. If it lives, it's big enough, it's brave enough to embrace everything. And this is what Hebrew is today, and this is a great victory. Every morning when I get up, my daughter, I get up the earliest at home. I get up at 5 o'clock, and it's my duty to awaken, to go to my daughter's room and say, "Hey, sweetheart, it's morning. One should get up." And she opens her eyes and she looks at me and she says, "Ani ohevet otcha." I love you. And she says it in Hebrew. So we won. This is our
it's funny because I wanted to ask you, when I was reading your recipes, they're very approximate. It's very kind of soulful. It's not like exactly a teaspoon of this and exactly, 150 grams of that. It is very kind of part of the soul and work it out. And I wondered if the way you write, because I've only read the translation, if the words you pick also kind of give the general picture, if you're very specific about your vocabulary. Like, do you have favorite Hebrew words, or do you just kind of try and share the feeling?
It's a very interesting question. I don't know. I always have the feeling that when I write, there are these threads between my mind and the computer. And somewhere there are my relatives who are mostly gone, And, but I'm very sensitive about language. So I would say that my Hebrew, just like my pronunciation, is multi-layered. it's this and it's that, and it's old Hebrew and it's beautiful Hebrew and it's slang and it's, you know, and it's cheap Hebrew, because I like all the colors of Hebrew. I must say that for years I was trying to get one of my memoirs translated, and it never worked. And eventually I said, maybe it's too difficult to translate, because Hebrew is so diverse in my writing that it's just impossible. But then I said, you know, Gili, if they translated Shai Agnon and Amos Oz, they can also translate you. Don't worry, it's okay. And then I found the right translator, and I think he did a great job. And but it's true about the recipes, because I think that cooking is something that comes from the soul. And I really dislike, first of all, I loathe molecular cooking. I think it's dreadful, and it's an embarrassment, and nowadays we all recognize it. But also I think that when you give cooking too much weight, it's ridiculous, because it's about love, and it's about hugging people, and it's about, you know, sharing stuff with people. So my recipes are, I would say, naive. Other people may say primitive, because they're very, very, very simple and very direct and very basic and in your face. And I think, I deeply think, you know, after having been in this industry for 30 years now, in the food industry, I really think that this is what food should be about. And I think that we're coming back to it now in quarantine. We're coming back to simple cooking, to hugging food, to you know, food should be a labor of love, and it should be, you should feel secure when you're next to a dish. You shouldn't be afraid of it. You shouldn't, you know, suspect it. It should be your friend. And this is why I always refuse to be a mentor or a judge or a this or a that in all these food competitions on television. I really don't like it, because who am I to tell an elderly Ethiopian woman who cooks, you know, you should have done it this way or that way? She knows better than I do. Come on. So a bit of modesty is good, and a bit of martini.
To what extent, again, I've looked at your recipes, and also you've talked, I mean, you came to Melbourne and talked a lot about hummus, but I wondered how you would, it's all Israeli food, but in what way is it Israeli, would you say, and in what way is it representative of the neighborhood that Israel is in now, you know, the Middle East?
So it's a very, very big question in Israel right now. The identity of dishes, and whether we confiscate the cuisine of our neighbors and make it Israeli, etc. I tend to disagree. I think that food belongs to everybody. I think that once you make a dish, it's yours, and it doesn't matter whether it came from Palestinian origins. And I'm all for Palestinians, and I wish they would get their liberty and then their independent state, of course. But the fact that I make hummus is wonderful. Why should we commiserate about it? That no, he took it, they took it. No. You know, in excavations in the Carmel Mount in caves, they found chickpeas from the Neanderthal times. So way before they were Palestinians or Jews, there was hummus. It belongs to everybody. And I don't want food to be political. This is one of the reasons that I'm not that keen about all these chefs for peace thing, because you know, I come from Israel. I see reality. It touches my skin. I know that it's not true that if we would all just break bread together, there would be peace. No, there would be peace when we would be willing to do some sacrifice, to give something, to be thoughtful about our neighbors. I love cooking with Palestinians, of course. They're my friends, they're my cousins, they're my neighbors. But food does not belong to them and does not belong to me. And look at me, you know, what is my cuisine? Am I Yemenite? Am I German? Am I Lithuanian? Am I Tunisian? Am I Israeli? Who knows? I'm Israeli. I was born here. I belong here. I breathe this air. And this is who I am.
So do you feel like, because I feel like Israeli identity has changed over the last few decades. So do you feel like if you're Israeli and you've been writing about that food for the last, 30 years or something like that, then if Israeli identity has changed over those years, then do you feel like the food, has what you've been writing about changed over those years? What did you write about 30 years ago about Israeli food? What was there to write?
When I started writing about food, well, I was lucky that it was in the 80s of the 20th century, and this was the beginning of the food revolution in Israel. So things started to get better. You know, food in Israel was very, very, very naive up until the 80s. I grew up in Jerusalem of the 60s and 70s. I came from a family that was quite well-to-do, so we went to restaurants, which was very uncommon, and food was hideous. There were only 2 or 3 good restaurants in Jerusalem, and the food they served, you know, nowadays would look like a joke. But still, for us, it was something. Then came the 80s and everything changed. And at that time, I started writing. So writing about a revolution is always fun. Nowadays, Israel is at the forefront. Israeli cuisine is the right thing at the right place at the right moment. You know, it has its minute or its hour or its day, and everybody loves it and everybody looks up to it. So I would say that I always wrote about Israeli food, but in the beginning it was a tongue-in-cheek thing, but now it's with admiration, because I really think that our food is really good and creative and original and interesting and intelligent and completely ruthless, just like Israelis, and the complete opposite of Australians.
It's funny what you say, actually, that because there's a restaurant here in a non-Jewish, in a non-Jewish suburb owned by people who have no relationship with Israel, and it is Israeli food. It's a pub and it's Israeli food. So yeah, I think you're right that you've traveled the world and there is a lot of kind of jealousy. But when you use those words about Israeli food, can you give us an example, like put a dish to when you call ruthless, what do you mean by that?
I think what we're famous for, Israelis, is that we're really ruthless. We disrespect rules. Like, for instance, when we were talking about quarantine, so my daughter's mom, her partner lives north of Tel Aviv. So they announced that there is going to be quarantine during Independence Day. Her reaction, I mean, what would an Australian person think when they announce that there's going to be a quarantine on this and that day? Okay, how would I do it? What do I need at home? Why is it clever to do quarantine? Is it going to help us? No. The Israeli reaction, which is my daughter's mother's reaction, is, how am I going to bypass it? I'm going to drive up north to my partner who lives up north. What would I tell the policeman? I would tell them that my partner is a doctor and that I have a headache and I must get tested, etc. This is Israel, and it applies to our cuisine as well. We disrespect rules. If you look at Italian cooking and French cooking and a lot of other cuisines, which I admire, of course, when I got to Lyon for the first time in France, the heart of the French cuisine, I was shocked. All the restaurants in the city served exactly the same menu, all of them. You got the same salad for a starter, the same main dishes, and the same desserts. All of them to the last one, except if you wanted to go to an, I don't know, an Indian restaurant in Lyon, and who wants to go to an Indian restaurant in France? In Israel, it's totally different. You know, when you cook shakshuka in Israel. So, okay, shakshuka, it's an omelet with a spicy tomato sauce, and it comes from North Africa. There is a, debate whether it comes from the south of Tunisia or from Algeria or from this or from that, but never mind. There are hundreds of versions because this is Israel and it's very democratic. So you would find shakshuka with bacon, and you would find shakshuka with spinach. Now, shakshuka should be red. Spinach is green. How did it get into our shakshuka? Because we do whatever we want to do. And this is Israel. And once you stop fighting it, you see the charm of it, because there's a lot to learn from it. And it's humbling in a way.
There is a lot to learn from it. I was laughing recently that in this quarantine situation, before you'd make a social arrangement with an Israeli and they'd be like, why are you asking me? It's Monday. How do I know what I'll be doing on Friday? And, and to the Australian, well, I have to make my arrangement because otherwise how will everything fit together? It's, I'm only I'm giving you 5 days notice. I'm compromised. I wanted to know a month ago. I've been waiting, And now with the quarantine, I feel like we've all around the world become Israeli. And, Mum tried to make an arrangement on the phone. She said, let's have a Zoom thing on Friday. I said, Mum, Friday's 5 days away. How do I know what's going to happen, by Friday?
No, please don't become too Israeli, because I'm not sure the world is ready for too much Israeliness. There are 8 million of us. It's enough. We love Australians. You do what you're good at. You keep apologizing for everything. We love it. We find it amusing, and it's very good.
It's good to know that every nationality has a place.
Yeah, definitely.
You talked about the shakshuka, and it reminded me of, I read a story about, in fact, maybe it wasn't shakshuka, but about when you were a chef when you were a cook in the army. And when I was reading the story, it was about, tearing capsicum, like pepper. And,
yes.
And I was reading it and I was really thinking, well, that is something that's very Israeli, because it's very rare that you
We were disconnected. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Hello, Gil. Oh, she's back?
Yes. Adele, can you hear me?
Oh, I disappeared.
Very good.
Sorry.
So we were talking about the capsicum.
The capsicum, I was wondering whether I was just saying that it's rare to have a celebrity chef or a food critic from the army. And I wondered whether that experience was formative. Did it inform your skills, or was it suffering? Were you cooking good food for people in the army?
No, in the army, I was in the intelligence service, but what do you do in the army? People think that you go and you kill people. Well, it's not like this. Yes, you have, at the beginning, you have basic training. You have to learn how to shoot 1 gun, 2 guns, 3 guns, 9 guns. It depends on which unit you're going to. I went to the intelligence service, so I had to know how to shoot an M16, an Uzi, and how to throw a hand grenade. But then, most of my work was office work. I was very good at Arabic. I studied Arabic at high school, and I was fluent in Arabic. So I was sitting in an office and doing intelligence work. But in the army, you have to be self-sufficient. So you have to clean for yourself, cook for yourself, clean the toilets, etc. This is what you do for the most time. So yes, we had kitchen duty once or twice a week. And the story goes that I went into the kitchen, and these are huge kitchens. Yeah, like I was at the headquarters of the intelligence service of Israel. It was, I don't know, 5,000 people. You get into the kitchen in the morning, and there is a mountain of capsicum that you have to break and take out the seeds from. And I did it, with a knife, very gently. And then the guy who was in charge of the kitchen came and said, "This is not how Israel won its wars." And he broke it with his hands, and he showed me how to do it quickly. And, it's a very interesting lesson that I've learned, and a very important lesson that you learn in life. We in the intelligence service, we were sure that we were the cat's pajamas. We were intelligent, we were well educated, we were in the top unit, and people who go to this unit usually, make it to startups of computer science, etc. But no, I've learned from this guy how to break a capsicum, which is with me up until today. So this is one of the best possessions I got from the IDF.
Is that something that you look for when you look at, when you're a food critic, when you look at a restaurant, the worst restaurants around the world, the best restaurants around the world, the best and worst in Israel? Is that some kind of a quality in the food that you're looking for? No longer looking at the finely cut?
I always look for truth. And people usually look at me and say, whenever I say, they say, "Well, that's full of hot air. What do you mean you look for truth? This is, you write about restaurants. Okay, write about restaurants. That's nice, but what does it have to do with truth?" But no, I look for food that is made with pain, with a touch of soul, with that you can feel that somebody was really caring for what they made. And this is it may not be the most sophisticated food, but it's the truest of them all. And this is what I need, because in our world, you have Instagram and you have Zoom and you have this and you have that. What don't we have? We don't have truth. We don't have people touching us and telling us, yes, we love you, we care about you. Yes, we can reveal our secrets to you. And when you get into this working class restaurant in a godforsaken town in the north of Israel, and you have kube soup, and you can feel the taste of tears in the soup, you know that you nailed it this time.
Is that because you feel like that soup, there's something, that kind of plain food is someone's family, someone's identity, someone's history? Or is it because you prefer a non-pretentious, is that just your taste?
I would go for the first one. I love pretentious food. I never cook it at home because, well, I'm not talented for this. And, we should leave it to restaurants. But, I did a series called Captain Cook. It was about the best restaurants in the world. I traveled the world through 3 Michelin-starred restaurants for years, and it was fun. Food can be, a very, very, very colorful game. But when you really want to reach out to people, when you really want to feel that you came back home, it's all about basic food. Just think of the opposite of molecular cuisine. That would be good.
Do you have top tips for us when we're allowed out of Australia one day and can visit Israel, where we should go?
Oh, tons of them. I think
Jerusalem versus Tel Aviv, are they different?
Well, if you go to Jerusalem, it's very difficult to find a non-kosher restaurant. If you go to Tel Aviv, it's very difficult to find a kosher restaurant. In both cases, I would say, first of all, start with street food. Street food is very clean in Israel. You won't get, diarrhea or anything like this. It's safe, and street food is wonderful. It's It's interesting. It's colorful. It has all the diasporas come into it, and I would say, if I have to give you names, so in Jerusalem, go to a place called Ishtabach Shemo. It's a pun in Hebrew. Ishtabach Shemo means God, actually. Ishtabach Shemo means praise the Lord, but it also means a man who is a cook. So it has a double entendre, and it's in the market, in the Machane Yehuda market, Ishtabach Shemo. It's the only restaurant in the world to serve a dish called shamburak. Shamburak is a wonderful, wonderful pastry. Shamburak comes from Hebrew. The word is shemevorach. Shemevorach means blessed. It's the blessed leftovers of the Shabbat dinner, packed into a dough and baked in a tabun. It's an amazing dish, and you buy it for, I don't know, 20 shekels, which is, I don't know, like $5, something like this. It's dirt cheap, and it's wonderful, and it's in the market, and it's really a great place. So this is one place to go to in Jerusalem. In Tel Aviv, it's different. In Tel Aviv, I would say, give Israeli cuisine a chance. Go and venture into sophisticated restaurants. Go to a place called Topolopompo, which is a Pan-Asian restaurant by a super talented chef. Go to the Santa Caterina, which is a wonderful tabun restaurant by a wonderful chef. Go to Igra Rama, which is a wonderful restaurant that grows its own food, etc., etc., etc. In Tel Aviv, options are endless. And also, another restaurant that I should mention is Luna. Luna is in Nazareth. It's an Arab restaurant. Right now, I think it's the best restaurant in Israel. It's owned by an Arab lady, and she was in education. She wasn't a restaurateur, but she had to make a living, so she started a cafe. And then the big shopping mall of Nazareth told her, come and open a restaurant in our shopping mall. And she said, come on, a restaurant in a shopping mall, that's embarrassing. I would never do it. And they said, no. We would build you a unit, especially for you. And they built a beautiful cubicle of glass on the roof of the big shopping mall of Nazareth. It has the best view of Nazareth. And there she cooks the most amazing traditional Arab food with a modern twist. And I think that this is what Israel aspires to be, like a Middle Eastern country with a modern twist, with respect to whoever lives in it and to whoever visits it. You should all go to Luna in Nazareth.
So we've got something additional today, and it's interesting that you comment on that also include an Arabic restaurant, because there's another, the cookbook by Yotam Ottolenghi, and also Sami Tamimi, his partner, called Jerusalem.
Yes.
And there's, it's interesting because, like your book, like they also have stories, and I think the feeling you get when you read it is that this is my grandma's recipe from Jerusalem, well, this is my grandma's recipe from Jerusalem, and you get a Jewish Israeli and Arabic Israeli, and has that nostalgic flavor. And it's interesting to me because you commented, well, you can't just bring about peaceful relationships by breaking bread, you need more than that. And I wondered, when I was cooking from the book and reading the book, that whether you talked about Nazareth specifically and outside of Jerusalem, but you said you left Jerusalem, but to bring us back to Jerusalem, that I wonder whether you feel like there's hope for more than just breaking bread, whether you feel like there is that hope of that joined history or joined nostalgia that their stories bring. whether Jerusalem has, whether its heart, whether we can bring back its beating heart, I guess, through food or in a different way.
So the Jerusalem cookbook is a very interesting story, because I know both Yotam and Sami, and they're great guys and great chefs. Yotam was 1 year beneath me at high school.
I must just laugh at that, because I saw him speaking with Etgar Keret, who is an idol of mine, in London. And Etgar Keret started and he said, look, I have to just tell you, I went to school with Yotam. And I did think to myself, I'm not going to tell you that, because it can't be that
this would be very strange, because Etgar comes from Ramat Gan and Yotam comes from Jerusalem.
I thought that. So I thought maybe.
But if you want a connection, I was Etgar's first editor in the newspaper. And when Etgar came to me, when I was living in San Francisco, he came to me, was, I don't know, 23 years old. And he said, I come to San Francisco. My mom told me, tell Gili that you must find Etgar red pants that would show that he has a great ass. So this is an Israeli mother to you. So coming back to Yotam and Sami, both of them grew up in Jerusalem. Yotam in Western Jerusalem, Sami in Eastern Jerusalem. Both of them are wonderful, wonderful, talented chefs. And Jerusalem is an amazing cookbook, but I personally don't think that it's honest, because the food that you find in the Jerusalem cookbook is not the food that you find in Jerusalem. It's a British cookbook.
I was going to say, is it a diaspora? Yeah, is it a diaspora story?
Totally. The stories may be right, but the recipes are Orientalist fantasies about the Middle East. You don't find this food in Jerusalem. I grew up in Jerusalem. There is a recipe for one of the famous recipes of the book, chicken in tangerine sauce and arak, like an anise alcohol. We never heard of it. It doesn't exist in Jerusalem. It's a wonderful book. The recipes work. It's great. The intentions are good, but it's, it's another layer of Jerusalem that does not exist, actually. It's a creation, which is okay. I wish I wrote that book. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I admire it, but it's not the food that I grew up on. And this is, many people tell me, in your trilogy, the trilogy is all about short stories that end up with a recipe of what we ate when the story happened. People tell me the recipes are so simple, they're almost primitive. And I said, yes, this is what I grew up on. This is the basic food that we ate. I wanted to keep it that naive. And Jerusalem, the cookbook, is the complete opposite.
So when you talk about the food that you like being sharing, it's the truth, it's the honesty, then that's really fascinating for me, because I feel like your comments on that cookbook, that in a way, that cookbook is the honesty of a diaspora projection onto what we would like it to be. So it has an honesty, but it's an honesty from the diaspora, which is really interesting.
Which is totally good,
yeah.
But it's not ours. It's just different, and we have a lot to learn from it, but it's not the genuine thing.
So do you feel like Jerusalem will ever become, the real city will ever become the interpretation that they've shared in the book?
No.
Would you want it to be?
Jerusalem is totally different nowadays, and it's okay. We shouldn't put it in the ghetto of our dreams. Jerusalem is different. Jerusalem is half Arab and half very right-wing Israeli. It's not, I would assume, your Jerusalem or my Jerusalem, but it's okay. It has the right to exist. It's super religious. I'm totally secular. It's okay that religious people have their own city. It's just not my place. I think that for me, my Israel, the Israel that I'm proud of, the Israel that I belong in, is Tel Aviv.
It sounds like it's a very Zionist statement to be able to summarize yourself as a city.
I wish. Tel Aviv is much bigger.
So yes, Bren.
Oh, sorry. I hate to cut off this fantastic conversation, but I do.
It's because you were bored and you don't like us. We know.
No, because Netflix has got this great show, and I've got to. No, really. This has been just the most remarkable conversation. I was thrilled to be a part of it. I'm thrilled that people watching can also be a part of it. I'm sorry for those who did ask questions that we didn't get round to your comments and questions, but I'm sure you agree with me that the back and forth of this conversation was worth just leaving uninterrupted. Adele, Gil, thank you so much for joining us. For everyone else, don't forget that next Sunday we're speaking to Yossi Klein Halevi. Until then, have a wonderful week. Stay safe, keep washing those hands, and goodbye.
Thank you. A
Shalom,
pleasure.
shalom.